Hi, this is Seth Breedlove with Small Town Monsters, and you're listening to the Monster Guys podcast.
This is Lyle Blackburn, and you're listening to the Monster Guys podcast.
Hi, this is Vic Cundiff with Dogman Encounters Radio. You're listening to the Monster Guys podcast.
Hey, this is Ken Gerhart, author of A Menagerie of Mysterious Beasts, and you're listening to the Monster Guys podcast.
Hi, I'm Icy Sedgwick, and you're listening to the Monster Guys podcast, and I'm the author of The Necromancer's Apprentice, so if you like magic, mummies, and mayhem, go and check it out.
Hello, this is Richard, the Fear Merchant, host of the Bizarre Cast, and you are listening to The Monster Guys.
Hey, this is Matthew Meyer from yokai.com, and you're listening to the Monster Guys podcast.
This is Ellie Haskin from Encounters Podcast, and you're listening to the Monster Guys podcast.
This is Chris from Werewolves in Siberia. You're listening to one of the most awesome podcasts in the world, the Monster Guys podcast.
I'm DC.
And I'm Michael.
And you're listening to the Monster Guys podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Monster Guys podcast, the final episode for 2017. 2018 is upon us, Michael, but first, let's celebrate what we've accomplished in 2017.
Let's do that. I mean, we've got a couple weeks left.
I mean, yeah, a couple of weeks, but we're not going to be doing any more episodes between now and the first of the year. We got to take a break sometime.
True.
So it's been a big year. It's been a fun year. The Monster Guys podcast has come a long way. Many of you have been with us from the very beginning over the past few years since we started this. We had a point after our first year where we actually took a few months off for a couple of reasons, legitimate reasons, not that we were slacking off or anything, but, you know, back in the very beginning, I can remember we just wanted to talk about the things we loved, and that was monsters, folklore, paranormal activity, the supernatural, and so we just started talking it up, and we had no idea what we were doing whatsoever.
Still don't to some degree, I'm sure.
Still don't know what we're doing with a lot of this, but we're getting better, we're learning. We had a great beginning of the Monster Guys podcast, but I think one of the things that stands out to me about our first year was that we could never hear you talking. And I always sounded like I was talking in a tunnel or something. And we figured out like 6 months into it that there was a button on our mixer that we had never pressed, or maybe depressed it when we weren't supposed to, and your mic wasn't on at all.
Funny the way that we discovered it. It wasn't even like a routine check or anything. I was just playing around with something on your computer and realized that this wasn't picking up both mics. I felt a little bit better after that.
We still got to get your volume up. I always tell you, eat the mic. Like I'm looking at you right now and saying, eat the mic. But, you know, the fact that we didn't have that button pushed, I mean, we were just face palming the whole night, knowing that for like almost an entire year of recordings, we didn't have your mic on. And so essentially the laptop was picking up your voice through the laptop mic, and my mic was picking up my voice and a little bit of yours. And it was infuriating because I would sit there and try to edit and get it to where people could hear you, and people would message me and they'd be like, can you please turn up Michael's mic? And I'm like, I've got it cranked all the way, and there was nothing. Then we find out we just absolutely have no idea what we're doing with sound equipment. So we have no business touching a mixer.
We are writers to the core.
We go into season 2 and we take a turn. We start to focus a little bit on some specific topics related to cryptids. Of course, we continue our storytelling. We have our Folk Tales podcast where we tell stories every week. We went through a full season of that this year, and our Yokai Tales where we tell stories, original stories about Japanese monsters and Japanese folklore. Those are always fun for us because at our deepest part of our heart, we're storytellers, and we'll be adding more storytelling because some people may or may not know that we write in the horror genre, and we write a lot of short stories. And a lot of those short stories are going to be coming to life in 2018, both visually and audibly. So we're very excited about a whole new element of storytelling in 2018. But the Monster Guys podcast, we've just been rocking. We started the year with Bigfoot, and we almost ended with Bigfoot.
Yeah,
but but we actually ended, of course, we've done some Christmas podcasts and folklore-related stuff, and we ended with aliens and conspiracy theories and Illuminati and all kinds of weird, crazy stuff. And we'll get to that in just a minute. But
the Denver airport.
Yeah, the Denver airport. We just had a great year. It was a lot of fun.
I'm looking forward to seeing what we come up with in this coming new year.
Yeah, and I think one of the letdowns for me this year is we didn't actually build our new studio that we wanted to build this year, and we're still kind of it's makeshift. Let's just say it that way.
We tried a prototype studio, but that didn't work out so well.
Yeah, it didn't work out so well. So we've still got our eyes on some space and kind of rebuilding so we can have better production all around. And of course, adding some people to the team that will be helping us with editing and production. It's just going to be a lot more fun, I think, adding team members and having better production, but we're working towards that still. I think highlights for me this year is working with folklorethursday.com, a group out of the UK. Of course, we've been friends with them for a couple of years now, but we wrote some articles for them, and we also did some podcasts for them, which ended up being one of our most popular episodes this year, the episode that we did exclusively for them. And you can find us on their website, folklorethursday.com. And of course, we interact every week on Thursdays with that community on Twitter. But just a thriving, awesome, fun group of people with the topics of folklore.
Which can be very broad. I think Ellie said it in one of the interviews that we talked about with her, and she described it as some people, you say folklore and their eyes glaze over and they think underwater basket weaving, I think she called it.
and Paul Bunyan stories.
Yeah. But Folklore Thursday...
And nothing against underwater basket weaving
or Paul Bunyan. But Folklore Thursday really digs deep into our old cultural roots, cultures from all over the world, and finds little tidbits and pieces of stories almost forgotten by a lot of people. And it's fascinating to see what people come up with and what pieces of history and culture people dig up.
Yeah, and to be able to write for them and bring monsters into that mix from North American legends and lore and some cryptids into that mix, it's just very exciting. So that was a big highlight for me. Another highlight for me was that we crossed over 100 episodes in total with our story podcasts and the Monster Guys podcast. We tipped over that 100 episode mark. Statistically, some people may or may not be interested in this, but statistically, most podcasts never make it past 7 episodes. I don't know if anybody knows that, but that's pretty significant. They say if you can get past 7 or 10, you're doing really well. We crossed over 100, so I think even though we pressed the wrong buttons on the mixer sometime, we're doing pretty good.
We're kicking still.
So that was a big highlight for me. You got engaged this year.
That did happen.
That did happen. So that was pretty huge in the midst of it all. And you started writing for Ballistic Interactive, an indie game development group out of Australia that we actually interviewed last year on the podcast about their new game that they're developing, and one of our podcasts had inspired one of the characters in their story, in their game. So we ended up interviewing them about that and about the game. A year later, you end up on the writing team. Now you're writing for Ballistic Interactive, getting ready for 2018 video game release, I believe. I'm hoping.
Yeah,
I can't wait to play this thing.
I think on their Steam page it shows as Q2, I believe. So that also did happen.
Yeah, definitely. So that was pretty big. Then, of course, we launched Welcome to the Red Table. We're, I think, 4 or 5 episodes in. We've got a huge episode coming right after the first of the year. Massive episode for horror fans. But Welcome to the Red Table allowed us the opportunity to talk about horror and everything horror, instead of mixing that into the Monster Guys podcast, where we deal more with legendary creatures and monsters and folklore. We separated horror out so we could dedicate conversation to that, and that has been met with some huge response. Horror fans are loving that. We're connecting more deeply with that community through Welcome to the Red Table. So having that show start this year was a big deal for me.
Yeah, the genre of horror is and always has been very near and dear to our hearts. So, and I think it's been a lot of fun as well to get to watch some specific horror movies for research.
Yeah.
So
it's always good to watch movies for research.
Yeah, no problem with the excuses there.
Another really big note for me this year, and I know for you as well, for the Monster Guys podcast altogether, is, music is important to us. We've always tried to reach out to local bands and indie bands and work with music in the podcast. We just love music, and we love that creative spark coming from that independent collaboration. And this year, we had our very first song written for us for the Monster Guys podcast. Chris Cavarato with Werewolves in Siberia, we actually connected with him this year, and he wrote the Monster Guys theme song. Then later in the year, he wrote a second song for the Monster Guys podcast. So in 1 year, we had 2 songs written for the podcast, and both of them are still, to this day, some of my favorite songs to listen to. I love listening to the songs, and I love listening to all of his music, but to have those songs associated with this show at such a quality level, I mean, I was just completely stoked about it.
I was going to say, I mean, you could take your pick with any of his tracks, and you would be pretty blessed. He has a way of making you feel like you walked into a paranormal scene, but the specific tracks that he made for us really hit home and create this awesome sense of, it depends on which song you listen to. One has this awesome sense of being hunted, and the other one's just a really great driving track. So
yeah, I was going to say all of his music is great, but I think the songs he wrote for us they're better than the rest of them. So
I don't know. Ghosts still gets me every time I hear it.
Yeah, it's just really great music, and I'm very proud that we've had the opportunity to work with him, and that he took the time out this year to write a couple tracks for us. He's actually writing another track for another one of our shows that's coming in 2018. He's just, in my opinion, just brilliant creative genius, and he's very generous with what he's willing to do and help further the community. And so we're fortunate to have him on the team, and we'll hear more about him in just a little bit on this episode. But I think obviously the biggest highlight for me this year is just the continued growth with the Monster Guys podcast community. We have so many amazing listeners, really what I would consider friends. Friends of the podcast, friends of ours that have come through this podcast. You guys have stuck with us. Maybe you've joined us just in the last couple of months and you're sending us messages on YouTube. YouTube was another thing. We brought our YouTube channel back, and that's getting some great feedback. I don't even think we're really advertising that, and it's growing and getting some great interaction there. But just the community that has grown through this podcast over the past couple of years, it just never ceases to amaze me, and I feel very fortunate to be a part of that community. So if you're listening, thank you, because you mean the world to us. Without you, this is nothing. but the fact that you're not just listening, but you're talking to us, you're interacting with us, we're having fun together. I can't tell you how many times we just end up in joking conversations on Twitter or Facebook, or now we've got people, friends of the podcast, that we actually hang out with. You know, if they're close enough to us. And I can't think of a better way to celebrate doing a podcast than having a group of friends to share it with. And we've got a great group of friends and listeners in this community.
We really do. And also, let's not forget the people that we've talked to on the show itself. Those have been some pretty fantastic people. We've been very honored to speak with some fantastic individuals. We get to pick some pretty great minds on this show, and I hope everybody out there in that community has enjoyed listening to some of the brilliance that we hear from.
Yeah, so let's get to that, because we have talked to some really brilliant people. We want to play a couple of clips, a few clips from the year, but give you a little bit of behind the scenes on some of these. And some of them are humorous, some of them are serious, but wanted to share with you a little bit about what was going on behind the scenes during some of these episodes. And stay tuned, because right after we go through some of these clips, we have something significant to share with you. Very special end of the year event that we do every year, but this is the first time we've ever done it on the podcast, and we want to share that with you. So first clip we've got is very beginning of the year. We talked about Bigfoot. We spoke with Troy Hudson. He's with the Sasquatch Genome Project and the Honobia Conference in Oklahoma. A really interesting guy. The group that he's working with is just stellar in the work that they're doing. And he's going to tell a story about how one of the only times he actually felt in danger being around a Bigfoot. And then a little bit about the language of Bigfoot from a scientific perspective, which totally blew me away. And I love hearing this kind of stuff all the time. So here's a clip with Troy Hudson telling that story from the very beginning of 2017. I mean, these are obviously fascinating experiences for anybody who goes into that environment on your expeditions. At what point have you ever feared for your life? Have you ever felt like you were in danger, or maybe somebody in your group has crossed a line and maybe misread the communication that's coming from whatever was out there, and that you were in harm's way? And obviously with the size and the strength of this Sasquatch, this race of people, or this creature as somebody would call it, they could obviously do some great damage. Have you ever felt in harm's way, or felt like we've crossed a line, we're doing the wrong thing, we need to get out of here?
The only time that I've ever had that happen was we were on a BFRO expedition, I think in 2006, and we were up in the southeast area in the town of Honobia, southeast, way back up on what now is a private lease, about 9 miles back in the wilderness. We had a faith camp set up, and we had a young lady she was going to stay there by herself, but we had walked on down the road a little ways, and everybody else was about a mile down the road, set up in a small makeshift base camp. Well, one immediately came up behind her. She got scared. She pretty much almost froze stiff because she was scared. Well, the other boy and I ran back down there. Long story short, we got to her. We were getting to leave. We can hear the vehicle come down the road. I stepped away, and in all the excitement, to take a nature break. And before I even got to that, a pair of red eyes pretty much illuminated in front of me. Not very far, maybe about 30 feet, maybe, because we went back in the daytime to look at the distance and how tall it was. But those red eyes, and just the feeling, the nonverbal communication that I got of whatever you want to call it, it pretty much told me that we did not belong there and we needed to leave. That's the only time I've ever had that happen. Most of everything else I've had the experience has pretty much always been positive in my mind, but my approach may be a little bit different towards everybody. And again, we just don't go in there with a bunch of flashlights and start shining on flashlights and night vision and thermals everywhere. We pretty much try not to be the intrusive part. We pretty much go to a spot, stop, and let them come to us. And that's not the only way.
Yeah, and my question about that moment where you felt like you were in danger, possibly, I wondered, did you have a flashlight? Is that how you saw the red eyes, or were these red eyes that were just coming from a natural source with no illumination on them?
We were so far down in the pine forest, and it was there was no moon. It was illuminating. That's the first time on. That was about 2006. That was the first time I actually saw eyes. It was really, okay, here's the picture. It was dark, a mass of darkness. I heard a low rumble. When I turned to raise my head, look up, two pair of eyes went from a blackness to illuminating bright red, and then they went back. I was so close, I could see the iris. I could see his outline of his iris in his eye, or she, I don't know. Well, I immediately turned and walked back over to where they were standing, and I said, we got to go. That was the beginning in my mind that this was something more than, they're more than just, I was like, no, they're not an ape, they're not a monster. There's way more to this. And
I've even read in some reports that they have or have developed, and this kind of gets into a little woo-woo for some people, but
Right.
I've read that they have telepathic abilities to communicate with humans and send those warnings or communicate somehow, possibly on a level of auditory sound that is below human hearing. Am I correct? Am I accurate in saying any of that?
Yes, yes. We basically hear at 2 megahertz. There has been, back in the BFRO days, one gentleman actually manufactured a device that would pick up infrasound, that would record infrasound. And even in my own research, when I was playing around with parabolic listening devices, when we would start to hear noises, verbalization, and we said, hey, something's over here. It's funny, when you point your recorder or point your parabolic in that direction, you get some sort of interference in that recorder and in that parabolic mic. Thinking back in the days when we were operating those infrasound recorders, you're recording sounds below our hearing, which is 2 megahertz. Scott Nelson is a retired naval cryptolinguist that has done some study on the language. He's been a speaker at our Bigfoot conference for a number of years. He and I've had, private conversations together, and it is believed in the Bigfoot researcher community, and in my belief, that their language, when they speak so fast. When you record their sound, when you record what you think is a grunt, it sounds like a, but when you slow it down below our hearing and slow that sucker down in some software, you can hear the words. You can hear the mocha, boca, bola, you can hear the verbalization.
Wow.
So sometimes people think that you're a grunt or a growl. It's actually language being spoken, but it's just spoken so fast that, it's the same with this word.
Not long after that, Michael, we connected with Lyle Blackburn of Boggy Creek Monster fame. Let me tell you something. This guy is both funny, down to earth, and about the most human I've ever met.
Both, you say?
Both. Did I say both? And I said like 3 things? But he is, and I say that in a nice way. He's just so down to earth, and he's the type of guy I just want to sit on the front porch and talk to as the sun's going down, smoke a pipe or a cigar, or bring out the guitar and harmonica and talk about monsters.
Yeah, I think that describes him pretty well. And let's not forget, he's a big part of Ghoultown, which is an awesome band that I had never heard of until this year, and I fell in love with their music as soon as I heard it. You would want to sit on the porch. I would like to do that as well, but I'd also like to kind of just go listen to one of their jam sessions.
Man, and during our conversations with him is, I think, when he was on tour or getting ready to go on tour to the UK and play with some big bands, and they were releasing their next album. During this conversation, we catch up with Lyle for the release of his second book, Beyond Boggy Creek, which followed up his very popular first book, The Beast of Boggy Creek, and that's, of course, the Bigfoot creature that has been made popular from Fouke, Arkansas, and the movie that was done back in the 70s about the Boggy Creek monster. But we had a chance to sit down and talk with him about all of this, about Ghoultown. He actually let us use a couple of his songs on the podcast to intro, which was a real treat. And we'll have a funny story about Lyle in just a few minutes. But here's a clip of us talking to him about the Boggy Creek monster. A very cool story here. Let's go back a little bit in history. What can you tell us about the Boggy Creek monster or the Fouke monster? Give us some insight the history, first contact, any of those significant sightings. Take us back a little bit and explain to us what it is and what we need to know coming up to now about the Boggy Creek Monster.
Okay, well, I'll try to put that in a nutshell because it does encompass a number of years. But essentially, this creature first came to the attention of the public in southern Arkansas near the town of Fouke in May of 1971. And in this case, some people had moved into town for work, and they were living at a little, wood frame rent house smack dab on the edge of the woods. I mean, Fouke is a very, very small town, and at the time it had about a population of 500. And, people lived and worked in the outlying areas that were very near the Sulphur River bottoms and the Red River Valley watershed, extensive, rugged and swampy terrain. But anyway, these folks lived there not too long and began to experience something creeping around on the porch. It kept returning, and they finally got a glimpse of it. And from what they could tell, it appeared to be walking upright. It was, larger than a man and appeared to be covered in hair. And that was reinforced on one evening when this thing put its hand through the window, apparently trying to grab either their pet or, just to grab someone inside. And that was sort of the last straw. And they borrowed the shotgun from the landlord and confronted this thing and took some shots at it. And ultimately, it was dark and they couldn't quite get a good shot at it. But they went out to look to see what it, if they had hit it. And one of the young men, Bobby Ford, got very spooked and ended up, said, "Hey guys, I'm heading back up to the house. This is just freaking me out." So as he was en route towards the house, something came around the corner and grabbed him, and he fought with this thing and ended up nearly jumping through the front door. He ended up being taken to the Texarkana Hospital. Texarkana is the closest big city to there. And of course, the doctors ask what happens. He explains that it was attacked by a large hairy monster, and that makes its way to the news.
Right.
So that was the first time. But as things went on, subsequent sightings occurred, and that's when the newspaper dubbed the creature the Fouke Monster. Bigfoot was not a topic on people's minds back then. They would, any Bigfoot creature, you would be given a name such as, Fouke Monster, whatever regional thing. And also, as well as this kind of became a topic, a lot of the old timers said, well, hey, this isn't the first time we've had reports of this. And so things started coming out that there had been quite a longer history of sightings in this area that dated back to the 60s, 50s, and even the 40s of sightings of a, upright, 7-foot-tall, man-like hairy creature in the area. And all of this was just hitting the newspaper right and left, and that inspired a Texarkana man by the name of Charles B. Pierce, who was looking to do a documentary or a film to come down there, and he ultimately made the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek, which, like I said, went on to be very successful and made this whole thing very famous.
I hear that was very scary back at the time. I think I watched recently a talk you had done at a convention, and you had said special effects, it kind of stands up to today, but back then it was actually very terrifying for the time.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, it was, in a way, it was the blueprint for the dreaded found footage approach they use in horror movies today, because it was shot in kind of a documentary style, because it kind of did start as a documentary, but it was frightening because it just was so grainy and he didn't use actors. He literally got the people who had actual encounters to reenact those things. And, their dialect was authentic. They were real people. They, came across as such, and the way they sort of kept the monster shadowy and in the background worked very well. So yeah, it was super scary. I remember seeing it as a kid in a drive-in. Well, I mean, I was very young, and it, freaked me out, freaked out my family. And it became a very big movie. It was kind of the Blair Witch Project of its time, really, because it was made for about $160,000 and went on to make an estimated $25 million. Wow. And that is, huge. And it did directly guys like Eduardo Sanchez, the co-director of Blair Witch Project, cited The Legend of Boggy Creek as one of his big influences, and especially in the approach he was using to make that movie. So it was influential, and again, it just made the Falk Monsters super famous. And so, in my personal research, once I decided to do a book and started going to Falk over and over and talk to the locals, I found many more sightings and stories that were not made public, and in fact dated the first local sighting back to the early 1900s. And at the time as well, I thought I was going to be writing more of a historical book, about sightings of a creature and making of a classic B-movie horror film. But in fact, what I found was that the sightings had continued ever since. It's just that they really weren't made public, and a lot of them kept among the locals. And so my book became, a very contemporary story where I tell the history, and then I went forward into the modern sightings. And there's still sightings that I investigate. And again, like with my new book, Beyond Boggy Creek, I got to pick up and bring people up to date on some of the newer ones. So it's something that's ongoing and something that has a long history with it, and has become ultimately the most famous Southern Sasquatch case there ever was.
Coming out of that, we hooked up with Seth Breedlove in Small Town Monsters, which has turned into just a year-long friendship and collaboration. Every time they're releasing a film, we get the chance to review it and have Seth on as a guest. The first time we spoke with Seth was for the release of Boggy Creek Monster, the film. So it was back-to-back Boggy Creek info, one from Lyle and one from Seth. And of course, Lyle helped produce that film and narrated that film. And that's when I just completely fell in love and had a man crush on Lyle and his voice.
Do
you remember when we first watched that film and that song starts playing, and that sleepy backwoods bayou type feel sets in, and then Lyle starts narrating, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I get to listen to this forever.
I can't remember if it was you or I that said he was the Morgan Freeman of monster movie documentaries or something.
Yeah, something like that
effect.
But I mean, we catch up with Seth, and we talk with Seth not just about Boggy Creek, but at that point, that was, I think, Small Town Monsters' third movie release. They had done the Minerva Monster and the Beast of Whitehall, and then Boggy Creek Monster. And we talked a little bit with Seth about all of his films up to that point. And the clip we're going to play for you here, there's a couple of short clips. One of them is a story about one that stood out to us in Minerva Monster, and then about Seth's kind of philosophy, what draws him to make these kind of movies. So check this out, this story and a little bit from Seth about his thoughts on movie making. I think out of the three that I've watched so far, I think Whitehall and Boggy Creek are my favorites. Enjoyed the discussion about Minerva, especially the story where they were sitting there throwing rocks back and forth, and that poor girl gets pegged in the face with that rock. It was disturbing, but what an interesting story, because it was a very personal encounter.
Yeah, and that story about the rock getting thrown is, to me, that was the most outlandish. I don't know why I drew the line at that story, but that was the most outlandish kind of account in that movie for me. When Howie told me that story, I was like, this seems like something that was made up. And then this past summer, the daughter of the girl who got pegged between the eyes with the rock was at the Minerva Monster Day event that we put on out in Minerva a couple years in a row now. And she actually corroborated the story. Her mom was there, the lady who'd actually gotten pegged between the eyes with a rock.
Wow.
And she corroborated it, and that was the third person I've had corroborate that story. It means a lot to hear you include Beast of Whitehall as one of your favorites, because that's my baby. Like, Beast of Whitehall is my baby. what attracts me to these stories is the human element. You know, like the monsters are cool. Like the idea of cryptids is cool, and I love the subject, obviously, but I'm always drawn to the people and their emotional connection to the case and kind of how it affected their lives. That's why we don't do recreations in our movies, really, is the fact that I think that the real drama comes from seeing these people relive these events, you know, through telling their story.
Yeah, I'm drawn back to the story in the Boggy Creek film. It's one of the Crabtree brothers. He's passed away now. You mentioned in your film that he just passed away. Smokey Crabtree. That guy was a hoot. I mean, serious as could be all day long, but man, he was so animated, and the film just came to life on a different level when he started talking. I don't know if you can tell us a little bit, any kind of behind the scenes insight about some of those stories or him or anything on Boggy Creek. We just talked to Lyle a little bit about the Boggy Creek documentary. Give us some of your insights about that film, because that was, like I said, top shelf quality. But when that guy started talking, man, and started telling his story, I was just mesmerized.
I think that scene is like it's twofold what's going on there. Smokey is so animated, like you said, in the way he tells the story that he draws you right into it. And it's kind of a cool, creepy story. You know, he's talking about his son and his son's approached by this hairy monster, and the kid shoots the monster in the face and it doesn't even flinch. And, you know, you're getting this really cool Southern, I mean, his voice is so unique too. He almost sounds like, you know, like you're listening to a Chuck Jones cartoon character talk or something. But he's so cool. And then the other thing that really drives that scene forward is Matt Harris's illustrations. That's like the first scene we've ever done where it's almost, I think it's close to 4 minutes, where it's just still drawings. And people constantly say they love the cartoon sequence. And I think people watch that scene and they legitimately think those illustrations are moving, but they're not moving. Those are just static illustrations, but Matt does such a great job with them. But yeah, that sequence is the scene that people most often seem to talk about.
It's always a pleasure talking with Seth. We'll talk a little bit more about a couple stories from experiences with him in just a moment, but we move on to Dogman after this year, and we speak with Vic Cundiff, who has a massive online community through YouTube and through his podcast, where he hosts Dogman Encounters Radio. He also hosts a show about Bigfoot encounters as well, but we talked to him about Dogman, and here's what's funny about this show. I don't know if you remember this, but something happened to our setup and the timing of everything. We had to go to our local library to record this. So we go schedule out a space there, and we have this massive boardroom, and it's just us with a couple little laptops in the middle of this massive boardroom.
A lot of wires in the middle of the table, too.
A lot of wires in the middle of the table. And they put us in this corner glass room facing the highway. So the whole time, and you'll hear it in some of the recordings if you listen to the episode, but the whole time there's this noise always going, and it was so hard to buffer. But then you have Vic's voice, so smooth and just calming voice over the top of all that. So it was kind of an interesting experience having to go to the library to record this episode. And one of the things we were talking about with Vic prior to the recording was how a lot of people don't believe that Vic is a real person, which just completely blew my mind. And I listened to his show, and I love his show and the stories that are told there. And he has that very smooth and calming voice, and it's definitely a radio voice.
I was going to say, it's almost like a jazz radio DJ.
It is, but I guess he's been accused of not being a real person and somehow using, what do you call those things?
Like a robotic software.
Yeah, like a robotic software, voice software type thing, and it's not really him, so you don't know it's him. My opinion, he's a real guy, and we had a real conversation with him both prior to and after the interview. But I just thought it was funny how, some of the ways people come up with stuff that Vic Cundiff is a robot and isn't a real person.
And he's a really nice guy too, and it's funny because of how smooth he is. Sometimes he'll crack a joke and you won't catch it. You won't catch on right away. It'll kind of slip in there.
It is very funny. He's a great communicator, but he's a very nuanced communicator. I love talking to him and I love listening to him. I think one of the other things that stood out to me in our conversation about him about Dogman is the stories that are never told.
Yeah.
Every Friday night, you get a new story from somebody calling into his show about Dogman, and sometimes, they are unnerving. Creepy and scary. But he told us, he said the real meat of it all are the stories that are never told on the show because they're too scary. They're too violent. They're not appropriate to put out there. And really, a lot of his time is spent with people like that who really just need to tell their story and get it out. And so he's become an ear for people, that they can talk to, and he just listens and let them get the story out. Because some of these people who have these experiences, are dealing with PTSD, they're dealing with emotional trauma of all different flavors. And that show has become a place where that group of people who encounter Dogmen can find a little bit of peace, a little bit of comfort in the midst of it all.
Yeah, I think it helps to know that, you're not alone.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with something like that. It's not something that we can explain. It's very elusive. It's just a strange phenomenon that is very real for a lot of people in our world. And that's very hard to deal with. I don't care what you believe about Dogman or Bigfoot or any of these monsters that we talk about. If somebody has an experience with something that they can't wrap their head around, it affects them deeply, and they need somebody to talk to. So kudos to Vic and his show for being an ear. But here's a clip talking to Vic about Dogman Encounters Radio.
In fact, I got my start in hosting talk radio when I hosted, or actually co-hosted, a Sasquatch-specific talk radio show called Campfire Shadows back in 2007, and I also co-hosted that in 2008. But when I was co-hosting that show, people who would beat the bushes all the time, they would come in and talk about seeing these dog-faced boogers. I guess I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. In the South, instead of referring to Sasquatch or Bigfoot as being exactly that, they call them boogers down there. Well, these guys I knew of who would beat the bushes all the time down there in Alabama and Mississippi, they came back and started talking about dog-faced boogers they had seen. Well, when I heard them talking about dog-faced boogers, I thought, well, what in the world is that? So as I started asking them about what they were talking about, they started talking about these things that turned out to be dogmen. Well, what originally had drawn me to the Sasquatch phenomenon with dogmen, or dog-faced boogers as they call them, everything was amplified by a magnitude of 10 at least. In my opinion, dogmen are that much creepier than Sasquatch. They're obviously much more elusive than Sasquatch. They're definitely much creepier than Sasquatch. Everything that drew me to the Sasquatch phenomenon, like I said, it was just through the roof with these guys. So I dug into the topic, and it wasn't too long before I noticed that whereas with Sasquatch eyewitnesses, if you see a Sasquatch and need to talk to someone about that experience, especially if you're traumatized, there are tons of people you can reach out to and do that with. But with dogmen, if you have a dogman encounter, which is almost always more traumatic than a Sasquatch encounter, I noticed that there really wasn't anyone that they could go to for help like that. Sure, they could go to authors, but as far as getting the actual help, the person just wasn't out there. So I thought, you know what? There's a niche I can fill, and a very useful one at that. So that's when I started all this. Everything that you know as being dogman encounters. I started the website where people who had had their own encounters could contact me, and I could in turn contact them and try to help them through their experiences. And not too long after that, I started the show, Dogman Encounters Radio. So that's how it all came together.
And I've listened to your show for a little while now, and I can say that I really get a deep sense of caring, both from you and your other listeners and fans on the different forums where they listen. I just want to say to you, I appreciate what you do for these people who need a place to tell their story. Because from everything that I've gathered about Dogman, and especially in comparison to other cryptids or monsters or however people want to term it, it is a much more traumatic experience. It seems like it's also that much more fantastic. Certainly cause for more people not to take people seriously when they share these encounters. Is that your experience as well?
Oh, it is. Imagine having an encounter with a Sasquatch. It's creepy, but it's really talked about quite a bit. I mean, if you go to any grocery store, look at a periodical, you'll see in the tabloids, Sasquatch this, Sasquatch that. Think about all the shows on TV about Sasquatch. It's a known creature. Whether it's recognized by science or not, that's a different matter, but it is known pretty widely. But with Dogmen, when people have encounters with them, since they're not readily known by the public, number one. Number two, since they're so much more terrifying in appearance than Sasquatch, when you look at the package, it's just so much harder for people to get over an encounter with them, especially when you consider their apoplectic nature. When people have encounters with Sasquatch, yeah, sometimes they get aggressive and hostile towards the eyewitness, but with Dogmen, that's almost always how they are. So everything, all their qualities, all of a Dogman's qualities, that just goes together to make it that much harder for an eyewitness to get over an encounter with one of them than, say, a Sasquatch eyewitness would have trying to get over an encounter with a Sasquatch.
Then we have the opportunity to speak with Ken Gerhart, who is, just an amazing individual and researcher, cryptid researcher, Bigfoot, monsters all over the world. He's been on all kinds of television shows, but again, he's kind of like Lyle. He's just a very down-to-earth, nice guy, very pleasant to talk to, and very knowledgeable, very smart. I really appreciated the intellectual perspective he brought to the topic. And we talked to him, of course, about flying humanoids, which you almost have to bring an intellectual perspective to that topic or you are out there.
I think you're out there even bringing that, but in a good way.
Yeah, but Ken has that ability to ground this conversation.
Well, he makes it very academic, and he's, I believe he wrote a book called Flying Humanoids or something to that effect.
Yeah, he's written several books. One of them is Flying Humanoids.
So there's a lot of research that went into that conversation just from his personal background, I'm sure. So I think one of the funny things about that particular episode is that's the episode we had a bit of a prototype studio set up.
Oh my gosh, Michael.
And it did not stay set up.
Oh my God, I can't even believe that we attempted this. This really goes to lengths to show you how much we don't know. For this show, we decided we are going to build ourselves a standing studio in the room where we record, and we're going to get in it and really have this great soundproof, because we have some noise issues with where we record right now, and sometimes it's difficult to overcome those. So we decided we're going to build this, and essentially what we did was we set up a box.
We set up a few boxes.
But it was huge.
Yeah.
We were like duct taping these things together to make it into like this standing booth. We were foaming, putting foam
and blankets
and all kinds of stuff on the inside and the outside to completely give us this very cool buffered sound. And I remember we had trouble keeping one of the boxes stable, so I think we got one of our bow staffs from martial arts training and propped it up inside the. I don't know if it was.
If you listen to the episode, there's actually a part, because I was kind of wondering if you would hear it, but the ceiling of that studio, that homemade studio,
started caving.
Yeah. So I actually got up, and you can hear the chair move, and walked across the room, grabbed the stick, and shoved it up under
oh my gosh! So we're like
caving.
The studio is caving in, and we're telling Ken about this, and he's like, "What? Huh?" He's like, "What kind of mics do you use?" And I'm like, "Forget the mics. We're just trying to put a box up." But we're like all tucked up under this thing and trying to talk to Ken, and you and I are trying to have this intelligent conversation with this very smart guy, and
in the
here,
midst of holding things
we're
up.
holding boxes up, and I'm just like, forget it. So our makeshift studio at that point was taking a beating, and we were trying to upgrade, and I think we just made matters worse. So that was very funny. That was happening literally the entire time we were talking to Ken that night.
Yeah, because we had our wires running through the boxes and such, and we had things like our speakers placed in such a way that it was they were anchoring that studio. So it's not something that we could just push over in the middle of the conversation.
Pro audio people would just take us out back and beat us if they saw half the stuff that we did.
They might after this episode.
Yeah, they definitely. So here's a clip with Ken talking about flying humanoids. Ken, let's step back for a moment. Let's talk flying humanoids. These entities or creatures, to some, may seem to be some of the more fantastic creatures in the world of cryptids or legends or monsters, but people are having very real experiences with them. And in my belief, I feel like we're about to have a lot more very down-to-earth conversations about flying humanoids in the very near future. The scope of this topic can range anywhere from the Mothman to a Batman in Texas that I believe you write about, to aliens to ancient gods in Mexico. Can you define for us what are flying humanoids, and tell us about some of the ones that you've researched and the ones that we need to be aware of?
Well, flying humanoids, as the name would imply, are essentially humanoid beings possessing the features of a human, but with wings, essentially flying through the air. Now, this is kind of something that we refer to in my field as a zooform, not a true cryptid, not a flesh and blood, or presumably not a flesh and blood thing like Bigfoot, because, we're talking about an evolutionary impossibility. Humanoids were never at a stage of evolution where we would have radiated or taken to the air. There's nothing in the animal kingdom that really looks like a flying humanoid. But as you mentioned, many, many people have had sightings and encounters, quite terrifying encounters with something. And the most famous of these creatures is known as the Mothman, which has been reported in and around Point Pleasant, West Virginia, going back to 1966. Probably one of the most enigmatic features in the annals of the unexplained. Basically, a man-like figure standing over 6 feet tall with immense wings attached to its body, giant red glowing eyes, and many people claim that they were chased by the Mothman at speeds of 100 miles an hour in their cars. And so it's a pretty complex mystery, but things like Mothman have been reported around the world. In England, there's something known as the Owl Man from southern England and Cornwall that is a little bit different from Mothman in terms of physical description. As the name would imply, something with kind of a feathery or hair-like covering on its body with an owl-like appearance, but again, big red burning eyes. That's kind of a common theme that we come across. As you mentioned, in Houston, Texas, where I lived for many years, there was a figure known as the Houston Batman that was seen by 3 witnesses back in 1953, and that was a large man-like figure standing on the branch of a large tree, and he had wings and glowed. There's something called the Bat Squatch that's been reported in Washington State, kind of a play on Sasquatch, since they have sightings that was up there too.
Wow.
Briggs Road Man Bat from Wisconsin, flying man-like beings in Mexico, and all over the world, really. So, it seems to be a global phenomenon, even though Mothman is the most famous of those. But essentially, I was investigating flying creatures like thunderbirds for many years, and then, of course, I've been fascinated with Mothman my whole life, like some of these other things that I've investigated, but I never really looked into the matter. And then several years ago, my publisher asked me to write a book on the subject, and around that same time period, I did a couple of television shows where I was able to investigate some of these flying humanoids, and it is a really bizarre and completely mind-boggling mystery.
And then, of course, we come back after talking with Ken, we tackled some topics that people had been asking us to tackle, and really we just kind of opened the box because we want to revisit these topics. We talked about infrasound during one episode, which was a really great conversation, but again, it was just scratching the surface.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that one, and I enjoyed finding the two papers that go over. Somebody tried to make the statement that infrasound is why we have haunted houses, that it causes people to have those hallucinations and those feelings of dread, like a ghost is watching you. That was a fun episode to delve into.
Yeah, and I think I told you the other night that I believe it's the Insidious movie franchise, that is, I may be wrong, I think it's Insidious, that is experimenting with like a vest that moviegoers can watch and with sound effects that would kind of be like infrasound in the theater. And the vest that you wear would react to certain things in the movie. And what they're wanting to do is create this full immersion experience in the theater with films. And I knew this was coming at some point. I mean, if you've ever been to any of the big theme parks like Disney World, Universal, they experiment with this all the time and do some of it very well. I didn't expect a vest, though. That's a little odd, but...
I could see where it could be used to great effect, and that's why I don't want to wear it.
Yeah, and I do know that sound engineers use infrasound at some level to help create effects.
Yeah, Walt Disney used it, and he actually got into some scandals because he was found out to use it.
So we talk about infrasound, and we talk about one of my favorite topics, black-eyed kids or black-eyed children. And I know a lot of people scoff at that topic, but I love those creepy topics. I love writing stories about them. Matter of fact, I've got a story about that topic that's going to be coming out in 2018. But black-eyed children for me we also covered Hat Man and Shadow People and everything in that episode. And that was one of our more popular episodes. People love digging into that. Just the idea of kids showing up at your house and staring you down and like, we are coming in. It won't take long.
It won't hurt.
It won't hurt. Saying stuff like that at your doorstep. I mean, that's unnerving.
Reading people's minds. It's definitely a scary... I don't know if I would consider Black-Eyed Kids an urban legend or something completely different.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of on the edge there.
Yeah, it's definitely something that is unnerving, like you said.
But then we did a replay of our Wendigo episode. This is like the episode that we had figured out last year that we were messing up the sound. And so we tried to better it and give a little intro and replayed the Wendigo episode. And that's the episode that inspired Ballistic Interactive with one of the characters in their video game, and it's one of our most popular episodes ever. Even though it had some of the worst sound quality, the content was solid. The topic of the Wendigo is powerful and moving and a very popular topic, not just in pop culture, but in folklore, in Native American heritage, and in medical science and psychology. So it's a big topic, and it's one that we replayed it this year, but next year we're going to do more on the Wendigo. We've been asked time and again, please do more on the Wendigo. So we touched on it again in 2017 and 2018. We'll bring the Wendigo back at some point. We continued 2017 and reach out across international lines when we talked to Icy Sedgwick from the UK about the mythology and the folklore of the Crossroads. And I love talking to Icy, number one, because I love English accents, and she's got the Northern English accent that's just so thick and awesome to listen to. But she is so incredibly intelligent. She's a film student. She's into a lot of the same stuff that I'm into. So I just love listening to her stories. But she did some articles on the mythology and the folklore of the Crossroads, and we had an opportunity to interview her about that, which I found a very fascinating piece of our year. Here's a clip from that interview. Going back to the mythology of the Crossroads and bouncing off the stories that you shared, who else might we meet at the Crossroads? Obviously, Betty, who may be an accused witch, or the devil himself. Who else might we meet at a Crossroads? In addition to that, what items would we perhaps find there, or other experiences that we may encounter at a Crossroad?
Well, I think before I get to my main person, it was quite funny because I was reviewing the comments that I'd had on one of my posts about the Crossroads, and one of my friends, Amanda, actually has her own story about the crossroads, which I thought was really interesting. And she lives in, I suppose it's southwest England, in Bristol. And she was saying that there's a roundabout near her, and obviously a roundabout is basically our version of the crossroads a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously instead of just cutting straight across, you kind of go round this predefined central point. And she was saying that there's a tree on the roundabout, and it's been there for as long as anyone knows, and the trunk's always painted white. And she was saying that she's lived there. She said, I've lived here for 20 years and I've never seen anyone paint it, so who does it and why?
Wow.
So it's like this tree just randomly ends up white constantly on this roundabout. So I thought that was really cool. But I think the other person that you can't mention the crossroads and not mention him is Papa Legba.
Yes.
Who I think he's been the victim of quite a horrible smear by American Horror Story in particular. But I mean, he is like, the lore of the crossroads. He is sort of the king of that crossing, as it were. And I think he's fascinating. He's the kind of person I would go to New Orleans and go looking for. Because I'm strange like that. But I just like the fact that there's actually a proper figure associated with that space who can give you directions if you're lost and so on. And I just think that he is, because that's his role. Like, that is what he does. He guards intersections and so on. It's almost like they are this slightly dangerous, liminal, almost primal place, so they need to have a guardian to kind of make sure that nothing untoward happens, if that makes sense.
Right.
So and of course, because he's got a foot in both worlds, I guess that's why he can then communicate with both. But yeah, I'm a big fan of his.
And then, of course, Icy joined us again later on in Halloween in July for a segment. I believe she talked to us about masks, and she also joined us for the episode about the spirit veil. And she had some great things to say about those topics.
Now, I do want to say on that last clip, that's another one of our, not necessarily technical difficulties, but it is a moment where we had a glitch in the system, if you will.
Oh, yeah, big glitch. I think we pissed her off, and she was just very nice about it.
She was very nice about it. She was very forgiving and very...
I hope she didn't get too upset with us.
Was it only once, or was it twice that we missed our time zone?
It was, it was the time zone issue, and for some reason, we kept getting it wrong. So we missed a week, and then the week that we got to talk to her, I think, we messed up the time zone that day. And
so it was like 2 hours later or something.
Yeah, it was like 2 hours. After that episode and dealing with Folklore Thursday in England, I have found a website that lists all the time zones in real time. And anytime I'm dealing with anybody internationally now, I pull that website up and I watch every time zone, because it just irritated me to no end that we screwed that up. And thank you, Icy, for being so nice to us about that.
Thank you.
But we moved on from there. Of course, we revisited with Seth Breedlove and Small Town Monsters. This time, it was about the Mothman of Point Pleasant film that they released. So we had him and Lyle on together. Lyle was executive producing that show, I believe. We talked to them both. Now, here's what was hilarious about that. We did that one by video Skype. And
oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
So 2 things funny about that particular episode. Number one, in the midst of us talking about all this serious folklore and aliens and Indrid Cold and the Mothman coming down and terrorizing this city, I look over on the video feed and here's Lyle pulling up a little toy figurine. I can't remember if it was Chewbacca or Spock or what it was, but I look over there and he's got this figure up on the computer camera dancing and talking to us on the camera. And Seth's over here talking about something so serious about filming and production, and Lyle's over here playing with toys on the camera, and I'm like, I'm not going to be able to keep it together. I was losing it.
I could only see your face too, because we can't both be on Skype at the same time. Otherwise,
right.
We get a massive feedback loop with 2 computers in the same room.
Once again, our makeshift studio.
So I just see you start to crack up, and I peek my head over the top of your laptop, and
oh my gosh.
That's when I start to see what's going on.
I thought you were going to trip going backwards after seeing that, because you literally looked over the top of my screen to see this happening, and I'm losing it. I'm sitting here thinking I've got to ask the question next or something, and I'm not going to be able to keep a straight face. So thanks a lot, Lyle, for cracking us up. That's
Once again, Lyle seems like a fun dude to hang out with.
I just need to hang out with Lyle more often with his toys.
But then Seth, that episode...
That sounds bad. I don't... Scratch that from the record, please.
But then that same episode, Seth was very serious and very professional, but I think we were all really tired.
Yeah, we were exhausted.
But nobody was as tired as Seth.
Seth was new father, new daddy. Literally, I think it was like just a couple days prior is when his baby was born. And so he's up, or maybe it was a couple of weeks. I don't remember, because he's up all the time now, taking care of baby, taking care of mommy, and
editing and doing all
and still doing Small Town Monsters films and promotion, and I could just see the rings around his eyes. And I thought there were a couple times the dude was just going to fall asleep on the screen. And he just looked so tired. And towards the end of it, he's just like, good night, I gotta go. I just remember it was so abrupt at the end because he was gone. He was 3 sheets to the wind. But what a trooper. Thanks, Seth. Thanks, Lyle. You guys have given us some great moments in 2017. Of course, after that, we moved into a couple of special series that we did in the summer. The first of them, Halloween in July, we talked with 3 guests. During those episodes, we talked with Richard Martin, the Fear Merchant, who, by the way, we had met earlier that year. We had traded episodes with him. We did an interview for Richard, and Richard did an interview with us for his show. What a great guy. Again, one of those guys with those cool accents from Ireland, and just became really great friends with him throughout the year. So in Halloween in July, we had Richard on, we had Icy Sedgwick back from the UK, and we had Matthew Meyer on, who was at the time, I think, then again living in Japan. So we had 3 international guests talking about masks, scarecrows, jack-o'-lanterns, the spirit veil, some really cool episodes, just prepping ourselves for Halloween.
Yeah, and that was a fun time zone. I mean, I don't think we had any blips or anything, but that was fun to organize.
But it was a wild thing to organize. Now, here's a crazy story about that series. With Richard, he was on every one of those episodes throughout the month with us. It was almost like he was co-hosting with us for the month of July. But what a lot of people don't know is we recorded all the episodes with Richard up front. So we recorded week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4.
Yeah, because his work, he was going to be out of town for a while.
Yeah, he was going to be traveling a lot. And so we had to schedule all 4 episodes with him on the same day. And I believe it was a Sunday. Yeah. So we just got in there on a late Sunday morning and went until we were done. But here's the funny thing about, and Richard, you're probably going to throw me over the edge here, but I'm going to tell on you. Every episode, he started out, he's like, okay, I've got some beer. You guys okay? And if I'm drinking during the episode, I just want to get a couple of beers before I get on the plane tomorrow night. And so, of course, we're like, yeah, sure, whatever. But after every episode, he's like, wait, I need to go get some more beer. And so he brings out another 6-pack after every episode. And of course, Irishmen, now they can hold their beer. But at some point, things start to get a little iffy. And there's a couple points where Richard just starts kind of going off about things that had nothing to do with the episode. And we're like, you with us? And he's like, yeah. And so we'd have to take breaks for Richard to resettle himself and bring in more beer. And then at the end of it, I think after the last episode, right before the last episode, he was like, I'm out of beer. And he said, can you guys hang on a minute? I'm going to go down to the store because they're going to close in like 10 minutes. And so we literally just left the Skype video going and the mics going and everything. And Richard goes to the store to get more beer and comes back loaded and ready to go. And we finished that last episode with him.
We had like a sandwich or something in the interim.
Yeah, I think we grabbed a sandwich, but man, Richard was not going to go without his beer on Sunday afternoon. That was going on behind the scenes. Of course, it didn't come across in the show, and he's a total pro, and obviously he can handle his beer, but it was hilarious to see that. After every time, we were just like, okay, break time, beer time.
Yeah, and he's got that sexy, smooth Irish accent content that you point out. So he always knows how to make it a fun recording session.
Here's a clip from Richard during that series and from Matthew Meyer during that series. Matthew is a yokai expert and a Japanese translator, author, illustrator.
Brilliant folklorist.
Yeah, amazing folklorist and a great friend to the Monster Guys. We've talked to him several times over the past few years. We use a lot of his art by permission, so he's a wonderful friend. He talks to us from a Japanese perspective about the thinning of the veil and the spirit veil. Here's a couple clips from that series. Well, Richard, you mentioned earlier about how your girlfriend was talking about being out in the country, that it's still much more acceptable and more prevalent in terms of beliefs and superstitions. Are there any modern beliefs or superstitions that you know of, even for city dwellers, that you get a kick out of or people have fun with, especially during a season like Halloween?
Well, I suppose we've saved the best for last now of this month, because Halloween is, I suppose, the evolution of Samhain, the harvest festival in Ireland initially. So that usually used to take the form of a harvest festival where it symbolized the dark overtaking the light, which, if you peel that back again, was basically where the nighttime was becoming longer than the daytime, and that was passing over. So the whole thing was, and we've mentioned with the jack-o'-lanterns and everything, was to ward off the evil spirits that would be much easier to cross over, and I suppose coming over through the veil at that time, because the darkness was taking over. It was becoming the dominant force for the winter, and there used to be bonfire celebrations and jack-o'-lanterns being carved to ward off evil spirits, and there was festivals held to sort of celebrate all this and maybe to appease the spirits. So, as I said, there was people still to this day would be superstitious about especially building on farms, because there was a big renaissance of building when, I suppose, the Celtic Tiger, I don't know if you heard of that, there was a big building boom and economic boom in Ireland, and there was maybe motorways or roads being built through people's lands, and if there was maybe a road going through a fairy fort or a fairy ring, or people are building houses, there was a lot of superstition with regards to that, and there has been reports of people having bad luck with those. Whether you want to subscribe that being that there is actually malevolent force behind those is up to yourselves, but bad things have happened with regards to these fairies and otherworldly beings.
So it still sticks today then?
It does, definitely in Ireland. I'm not too sure outside of Ireland, as I can only speak for the region that I'm in, but it is something that is, I suppose, revered. I don't know, is that a right word? That's nearly putting it up on a pedestal, but people are maybe afraid of fairies still. I would be a skeptical man. I've mentioned I'm a scientific background, so if you can't put it on a chart, I don't really think it's worth mentioning. But this is the Monster Guys podcast, and superstition is the name of the game here, isn't it?
Matthew, are there any other... We talked about woodcutters and travelers and monks and people who go into far-off places. Are there any other special locations where the quote-unquote veil is thinner or easier to pass through, apart from just time frames or people going deep into the wood or into a mountain pass or something?
Well, yeah, and again, I think this comes down to something that's less defined by the stories of the time and more observed after the fact by yokai and folklore researchers. But when we encounter yokai, it tends to be in places that you would consider to be the borderlands. So, we mentioned the border between the wilderness and civilization, and that's why you've got so many stories that come from woodcutters and people who travel out into the wilderness. The border there is sort of one separation between our world and their world. But then you've also got a lot of yokai that appear at the border between land and sea. There's a lot of sort of beach yokai and sea yokai that you can see them from the shore, but you can't really reach them. And sort of this is another sort of borderland between humans and the natural world. Caves, of course, are a major one. And you see this not just in Japanese folklore, but in other countries' folklores, where caves sort of have a magical connotation to them. There's a few specific areas in Japan, like Mount Osore up in northern Japan, which is supposed to be the entrance to hell. So there are actual specific places where you can travel between worlds. But in general, I think the idea of the spiritual veil that separates our world from the other world, it can be found anywhere, but it's thinnest at the places where there's a border between civilization and nature. You also see this during seasons and during specific days of the year. And a lot of this has to do with astrology and Chinese cosmology, which was big in Japan. But particularly the changing of the seasons was always thought to be powerful with that sort of yin-yang magic. And so there are certain yokai that come about during certain seasons or during the changing of the seasons and during certain days of the year. So there's a lot of not just physical border, but temporal borders that we encounter that also allow yokai to pass into our world.
That was a great series, and then we did Dog Days of Summer. The funny thing about that, and we still to this day get messages from people about the intro to that series. One guy messaged me I think last week, not too long ago. He's like, listen, I had the headphones on and the volume up, and I had no idea that intro with those dogs were coming in. And he said he literally scared the out of me when I was listening to that. So thanks a lot, guys, for scaring me so badly. But it was funny. That intro still to this day gets comments.
It's a good intro. You did a good job on that one.
Yeah, well, thank you. So we started off with Black Shuck during that series. Here's you talking about that and me talking about my air guitar. Michael, tonight we begin this two-part series, Dog Days of Summer, with one of the most infamous and if not creepier dogs in folklore.
Yeah, infamous would be one word, and then I don't want to say prolific because it's not just one being, but it's so widespread, the idea of black dogs, and I guess we're going to start off with Black Shuck.
Well, you kind of gave it away there. That was less than epic on your part.
Take it back if you want.
You just kind of roll out the black dogs there like it's just a thing that happens every day. Yes, we're going to be talking about Black Shuck and the ghost black dogs of the English countryside. There, that was a little bit more epic.
I'll add to the epicosity here. We're going to reach back and connect them to old gods and wolf cults, too.
That's pretty strong.
Okay.
I'm feeling as though I want to do another air guitar solo, like I did a couple years ago when we got into all the high mythology of Scandinavian
about that.
and all that stuff. I can't remember what episodes that I did that air guitar on, but
I think it was episode 7 because it was around.
I don't know, but I feel like with Black Shuck and the Ghost Dogs, that could be a band name right there. And then their connection to Odin and Hecate and oh my gosh.
Now I was giving it away.
I'm definitely pulling out the air guitar. I'm going to tune it up right now while you start talking about Black Shuck. Michael, give us some intro because this is a fierce beast, very scary to a lot of people. And you know what? It's not just a myth. There's a lot of people that actually believe Black Shuck exists and attempt to produce evidence of his existence and his activities.
And we're going to get into 2 of those specific examples of evidence and or possible evidence tonight.
And of course, right after that series is when we started Welcome to the Red Table, our new horror podcast, which we're very excited about. That starts up, and then we move into Strange September with Ellie Haskin of Encounters podcast, which became one of our most favored podcasts. I mean, how can it not be when you're talking goblins in Kentucky and laser gun fights with cowboys? I mean, it just started there and went out of control almost.
It It didn't start in control. I don't know how it went out
Yeah,
of control.
It didn't never started with control, so it never went out. But yeah, we talked about Nordic aliens, reptilians, the grays, the good, the bad, the ugly, the in-between. We talked about alien abductions. I mean, it was the first time we've talked about aliens on the Monster Guys podcast, and people loved it.
Well, as a topic, because we did reference it briefly with one of the theories about black-eyed kids, but we steered clear of that topic as much as possible. And then in Strange September, we opened that can of worms.
Yeah, and Jesse Fivecoat, who is her co-host with Encounters podcast, was sick. He was very sick when we originally scheduled an interview with both of them, so we only got to talk to Ellie. So we talked to Ellie in 2 different episodes, Part 1 and Part 2. Part 2 came out in November, and then right after that, we got to talk with Jesse when he got well. And we talked to him about the Illuminati, conspiracy theories, and how Encounters got their start. But another funny thing about this episode with Ellie behind the scenes that a lot of people may not realize is that she teaches at University of Indiana, and we were rushed to get through that. Of course, the episode is so packed with all kinds of information, and we were just going on and on and on. And at the end, Ellie was like, oh crap, I gotta go. I gotta teach now. So she was like at the very end, rushing to get everything packed in that she could. And after we stopped recording, she was like, okay, bye guys, gotta go. And she took off because I think she was actually late getting to class to finish up the episode for the Monster Guys podcast. But here's a little bit from that conversation about the epic war between the Nordic aliens and the reptilians and the humans caught in the crossfire. So reptilians, the extraterrestrial and the terrestrial, you were there.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you need to expound on that classification? Are they malevolent? Are they helpful? What?
Oh,
obviously
yes,
they're the bad guys.
I'm so sorry. They are very malevolent. So they're thought to be like the most evil of all the lizards or of all the aliens. Sorry, and also all the lizards, really, as well. They are known first and foremost for the human breeding program. The Greys also do that in a lot of thought processes. And the Nordics do to an extent. Sort of all these aliens kind of have this like underlying goal of creating a hybrid race between their species and ours. But the intent behind the lizards doing it is so they can control us better, so they can get their agents in our kind of sphere.
So what you're saying, as a human race, it doesn't matter which classification of aliens we're looking at, we're pretty much sacked because all of them are out for us.
Yes. But, the Nordics are at least just trying to create human-alien hybrids so they can be more beautiful is sort of like the thought. Another train of thought, okay, so this is sort of not as well believed or not as frequently believed, but it is a narrative that exists. Are you ready? Buckle up. It gets pretty intense now that we've gone through all the classifications.
Here we go.
All right. So the Earth is obviously a younger planet. Our species is a lot less developed. Well, unbeknownst to us, there's been an intergalactic war taking place wherein the reptilians and the Nordics have been in a very long-term conflict with one another. So much so that the reptilians have borderline just completely destroyed all the Nordics that exist. They have ravaged their home planet. It is a long-term war, and the Earth is the new battleground for it. And the way that this war is being fought is not through weaponry, but it's rather through the manipulation of the human race for their end. So a lot of people, you'll see people on either side who think that it was either the Nordics or the reptilians who, helped us build the pyramids for their own end. And the Greys are also thrown in there too. I don't want to not say that. But the reason the Nordics are here on Earth is so that they can create human-alien hybrids to help their species continue to live because their planet has been so destroyed in this conflict. The reptilians, on the other hand, are trying to suss out, which human hybrids are part of the Nordic situation. And in that, they're also creating their own human-alien hybrids. So that sort of is a narrative that exists. Again, that's not as prominent. You don't see that often, but people do believe that.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop you there because have you ever seen a Nordic warrior?
Like a Germanic warrior?
Okay, yeah, because listen, there's no way anybody's going to take out that group of people. It's just not happening.
So
I
true.
mean, they're massive, powerful warriors. But I do want to say that whole thought process and I'm going to bring it up for the sake of argument, but it sounds very biblical, almost like an angels and demons type of conversation.
Yes, and I'm actually really excited that you keyed into that, because a lot of people think that the reason we have the narrative tradition of aliens versus demons is because of this long-term war that's been taking place, unbeknownst to us. And humans are so inconsequential in it, in the end, right? Because, like, the war's not about us, yet we're privy to it. We know it's happening, sort of like on this spiritual dimensional plane. So we have picked up on it and have translated it into aliens and demons, because we did not historically have the verbiage for, like, space creatures fighting.
Well, I've got news for you. We are the center of the universe. We are very much consequential in all of this. So I got news for
I really love that humanist perspective.
I got news for the Nordics and the reptilians. We are very important in the middle of all this. So.
I do love, like, this idea that we are, like, this new battleground, right? Like, our race will be the deciding factor in their ages-long conflict. And I just hope, again, that when I'm part of Star Team, I can just really assist with this in the most efficient way possible.
I can't wait till you're part of the Star Team. But then we won't ever be able to talk to you again, so I don't know.
I know. How sad is that?
We came back and finished up Strange September with another conversation with Seth and his new film, Invasion on Chestnut Ridge. I was about to say Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That would not have worked.
Trying to evoke it at some point.
Yeah, maybe. But I think Invasion was, to date, it's got to be Small Town Monsters' best. I don't know. It's hard to say. They just are so good across the board. But Invasion, to me, the flavor that it brought, the emotions and the visuals that it brought to the table, it stood out to me.
I think he's done really well in creating a completely different feeling with some signature, moves and signature styles in each movie that point back to Small Town Monsters. But each of the movies that we've seen from him have such a distinct flavor. It's not about one-upping each other. And it's really nice to have that.
We talked to him about Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, which is getting some pretty significant accolades, both from the industry and the viewership. So we're very proud to have had the opportunity to talk to him about that. Then, of course, we went into our series Monsters Among Us, which was very popular and at times controversial. We talked a little bit about Gilles de Rais, and of course, all of these episodes, we were trying to come from a historical perspective on serial killers or people who had just done horrendous acts against humanity. And I don't know if you, as a listener, realize it, but the topic of Gilles de Rais is a very heated debate.
Yeah. We thought Elizabeth Bathory, the blood contest, was bad because people still debate whether or not any of the allegations against her are true or if that's just a lot of political conspiracy of that day and age. But we got into Gilles de Rais, and then I think you've gotten a few messages of people saying their piece on whether or not he's innocent.
Some of them quite a piece.
Yeah.
About Gilles de Rais, and of course when we brought up the topic of Bluebeard and some of that, nobody really raked us across the coals, but
no.
People are very, very opinionated and very heated about those opinions with those particular people historically.
Well, yeah, and I think it makes for interesting discussion. I don't think anybody was rude or anything, but there were some eccentric statements behind the scenes.
It was all good. We certainly welcome it and enjoy the challenge, but that was a fun episode. That particular series is actually part of a larger series that we started back in 2014 in written form and is going to become an even bigger project in 2018 for us. So pretty excited about that. And of course, one of the funny stories that came out of that, right in the middle of that, if you remember, was Friday the 13th during the month of October. So Friday the 13th is huge in Halloween, in October, in a month celebrating Halloween. So we decided we wanted to do a fun episode right in the middle of these very serious episodes, but we were going to pull it off as though it was another serious episode. This is your idea. It took us a bit to get it right, but we actually went through some of the famous slasher horror horror icons and created almost like news stories about those guys, never naming them specifically, but just telling the stories as though it were another historical serial killer episode.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with that episode, and I think a few people commented it wasn't. I kind of was afraid that people were going to think that we were crazy, that people were going to catch on to the characters we were talking about and think that we were actually serious. Yeah. But if that had happened, I think we would have been doing our jobs great too. So.
Well, and some people laughed it off and joked with us about it. But I think the funny thing is I'm driving around with Holly, my wife, your mother, right after this episode was released, and she was like, "Oh, I didn't get to hear this episode. I want to play it." I think we're out on a date or something and driving around and just hanging out. And so I played the episode for her, and she's listening, and I can see wheels turning in her head. Like, there's something about this is off, and it's very familiar. And then she began to say, I know this story. I know when this came out. Wait a second. And by the time it got to the last part of the episode, which I believe is when we were, maybe it was earlier, but I think it was when we were talking about Freddy Krueger.
Yeah, I think.
But we never mentioned the name. We only mentioned dates and events. And she looked at me out of the corner of her eye, and she squinted at me, and she's like, "Are you kidding me?" This? Really? And so I had her going for a while. I was playing it off too. She's like, "Really? What happened to those guys?" And I'm like trying to give her all this serious historical background. And eventually she caught on, and I got in trouble. But it was a lot of fun.
Worth it.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, we ended November with another conversation with Ellie Haskin and Jesse Fivecoat of Encounters Cast. Here's a clip from Jesse talking about how they met and how Encounters got started by way of a ghost story, a real-life event that happened to them. Tell me how Encounters started. A lot of people, since listening to our interviews with Ellie, are interested in Encounters podcast. I'd like to give us a little background on that. How did that come about?
So it really since I met Ellie last year when she started her PhD in my department, we instantly clicked. We became really good friends, and we had this interest in the supernatural. I have an interest in stuff that's not material and the immaterial, such as ghosts and spirits, and she is more interested in the material, so cryptids and aliens and such. And so it kind of really just meshed. But what really crystallized it was I did some field work in Northern Ireland last December and January, and Ellie came over for a few days. And we, traveled in the Republic of Ireland in the north. And one of the things that happened was we stayed in an Airbnb in which I woke up in the middle of the night to go use the restroom. And I felt that there was someone standing in the corner of this small Airbnb that we were staying in.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, okay, that might be a thing, but I'm just going to go back to bed. And then when Ellie woke up, she said, "You'll never believe this crazy dream I had. I had a dream that this woman was standing over me on this side of the bed last night." And I thought, okay, well, that's really crazy. So I told her what I had experienced, and then as we're talking about it, we just it smells like something is burning, like something's on fire.
Wow.
And so we jump up and we check because we had done laundry, and so all of our laundry were on the radiators. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't accidentally setting this place on fire. But as soon as we stopped talking about whatever this thing was that we both saw, the smell was gone. We didn't really think about it too much other than the fact that we're like, okay, when we're in this Airbnb, we're not going to talk about it. So when we get back to the States, we were talking about it more, talking about experiences that we had before that. And then Ellie had the idea, let's do a podcast. So that's the very first episode, is telling that story and telling some other experiences that we have.
Wow.
And then we kind of move from there and do things that we've never experienced, that we've never thought about academically, but it's a great way to kind of inform our own research by preparing to do episodes on things like fairies or whatever. We just kind of dive into it and then learn something about that thing for that episode.
And out of that conversation and that friendship with Ellie and Jesse, we are looking in 2018 to do an episode, probably video, at least if not an on-site research and audio episode with them at the Denver airport. And of course, during those episodes with Ellie, we talk about the Denver airport supposedly being ground zero for the Illuminati and all the stuff that takes place at the airport and what's on display there. So we're talking about 2018, all of us gathering at the Denver airport and the outlying area and doing a project there together. So I'm very excited to see that happen. Hopefully that can happen in 2018, but we definitely want to see that happen with those guys. Now, Michael, we said we're going to do something very special to end the year and to end this episode, and here we are. What a lot of people don't know, because we haven't done live events in about a year, but every year at live events, we recognize people that we feel have made a significant contribution to their community or to the Monster Guys in support of what we're doing. And this year, we're not doing any live events, so we wanted to do this on the podcast. But we choose a group of people every year and award them the title Honorary Monster Guy. Last year, I think is the first year we had, or maybe it was 2 years ago, is the first year we had...
Yeah, it was 2 years.
Females on the list, not because we were not trying to put females on the list, but it just happened naturally this way. And so we were like, well, do you want to be called Monster Guys or Monster Gals? And some of them were like, well, I want Monster Guys. And some were like, I want to be Monster Gal. So we let them choose. And so anytime there's a female on the list, we let you choose whether you want to be an honorary monster guy or honorary monster gal. But we choose a group of people that we feel are doing something really special within the community that we're a part of larger, or somebody who's just doing something significant in the world. Just try to recognize them and have a little bit of fun and kind of grow our own community through that. So this year we are inducting the 2017 honorary Monster Guys and Gals through the Monster Guys podcast for the first time ever.
Which is pretty exciting. And it's quite a list this year.
It is quite a list, so we want to share that list with you. Now, what happens normally is that we're on stage with these people at an event somewhere, and we have like a knighting ceremony or something like that. Yeah. With like blow up swords or something. I don't know.
I think one year we used a plushy leek, like an onion.
Something like that.
From the audience.
From a cosplayer, I think. And then we'd try to give some gifts and, fun things like that. I think what we've decided this year is we're going to do something different. We want to send every one of these individuals a certificate and just recognizing that they are honorary Monster Guys. But instead of sending, a bunch of gifts like, I think we've done plastic crowns and sunglasses and medals and stuff like that in times past, instead of doing that, we're going to do something a little bit more different, something that's a little bit closer to our hearts. A lot of people don't know this about us because, again, we do some of this in our live events, but we are very passionate about bullying prevention and also about child literacy. So we have tried to find ways to support those efforts in schools, in communities, or at special events. As authors, I think we've possibly given away as many books as we've sold over the years.
Probably.
To schools, to kids, to fundraisers that support these efforts. A lot of times when we go out on the road, we speak about bullying prevention. We train people in bullying prevention. This is something many people don't realize. Bullying is one of the, if not the most pervasive and dangerous activities on the planet today, affecting not just kids at school, but corporate bullying, bullying online. It is so widespread, problematic, and pervasive. It is one of the leading causes of kids not going to school. I think it was several years ago, over 250,000 students in the U.S. alone were not going to go to school at any given time throughout the year due to bullying. Grades dropping, corporate bullying costing literally millions of dollars. Online bullying is so incredibly dangerous, so incredibly elusive. It is a big problem. So we try to train, and a lot of people don't realize, for instance, teachers in schools, less than 50% of the teachers in schools have training or have any effective means of dealing with bullying in the school system. Schools are getting better about this. A lot of programs are available, being developed. cross-community and cross-organization resources are being shared, and it's getting better, but it's still a problem that is so incredibly difficult to overcome. And we have people I talk to regularly and people that we've met right here in the Monster Guys community that have been directly, personally affected by bullying. It's one of the things that we're very passionate about trying to make a difference with. Also with child literacy. I believe you teach a child to read, you teach a child to live, you teach a child to be successful for the rest of their lives. And it's something as authors and publishers that we're passionate about. One of our goals eventually is to grow to a point where we can provide books to entire school systems, impoverished school systems or school systems that are lacking in resources, so that every child has the books that they need. And that stems into some other things as well, dealing with child hunger and other resources and difficulties that they're being faced with. But bullying prevention and child literacy are two big things that are very important to us. They always have been. Like I said, we've done things on the road, we've donated, we've given away. I think our accountant is very upset with us every year with as much as we give away, but I don't care. It's what we're about, and we're going to continue to be about that. So that being said, the 2017 Honorary Monster Guys Inductees, instead of giving a gift pack away with a crown or glasses or a medal or something, we're going to send certificates recognizing it, but we're also going to donate a dollar amount for each person inducted this year to a program or programs supporting bullying prevention today. And I don't have the name of those programs yet. This is something you and I have just discussed this week and decided we want to do in lieu of the gift package, but we'll probably reach out to you as a community over the next several weeks and say, hey, if you have an idea or like to see resources go to this program or that, we're going to touch base with you and make a decision as community. One of the things we've also done, people sometimes when they order our books from us, instead of paying for the books, we tell them to donate to a program, a bullying prevention program at the state or a regional level. So we've done stuff like that ongoing. So what we're going to do for every person that's inducted this year, we're going to set a dollar amount and say, we're going to give this amount to a program to help with resources or training or something to help this issue. Now, is it going to solve the issue? No way. It's too big. We can't do enough right now, but we're going to do a little bit and make this fun part of 2017 for us something that goes towards something that is significant and life-changing for somebody. So with all that being said, here are the 2017 Honorary Monster Guys and Gals inductees. You ready for this, Michael?
I am.
All right, here's the list. First on the list, Chris Cavaretto from Werewolves in Siberia. Chris has been such a huge support and made such a big difference in the Monster Guys podcast in our community this year, not just through his music, but through his support, his conversation, and how he helps us promote what we do. So Chris, you deserve it, man. Thank you so much for everything that you do. This one's for you, bud.
And also for having an awesome t-shirt.
One of the best t-shirts I've ever seen. I love it. Next on the list is Seth Breedlove and the crew from Small Town Monsters. I think some people could probably see this one coming because we've developed a really great relationship with Seth and the team there, but everyone on his team, we now consider you honorary monster guys and gals. And we appreciate what you do, the vision that you have, and the education and the entertainment that you bring through your films. We really appreciate you guys and want to recognize that. And I want to give a shout out, just briefly. I know we talk about a lot of the guys in Small Town Monsters and their various contributions to the films through some of our interviews, but I just want to say shout out to Zach Palmisano. I hope I'm saying that right, my friend. Zach is a big part of Small Town Monsters, and I'm hoping we have scheduled an interview with Seth for an upcoming film, and I'm hoping that maybe Seth could make it happen that we could have Zach on the show with us as well.
Is that a hint?
That's a hint. Seth, can you make that happen? We'd love to have Zach on with you. We've had Lyle and a couple other people with Seth, but we'd love to chat with Zach in the future as well. So shout out to you, bud, and all you guys over at Small Town Monsters. Next on the list this comes as no surprise, I think, as well, Mr. Lyle Blackburn, great friend of the Monster Guys, and we've had a lot of fun hanging out with you this year. Your writing is superb, and just the way that you approach these topics, getting in there, spending time with the people, and sharing your heart, we really appreciate everything that you do.
Including your action figure puppeteering.
Including that. So thanks, Lyle, for some good times this year. Next on the list, Troy Hudson. We started the year with Troy, and Troy is a lot of times behind the scenes, and a lot of people don't know about Troy, but Troy is working hard in the area of Bigfoot research and working with the Sasquatch Genome Project and, of course, the Honobia Conference in Oklahoma. And we just want to say a shout out to you, and thanks for spending time with us this year around this topic, and can't wait to see some more of that research come out. Next on the list, we'd like to recognize Ken Gerhart, just a fantastic individual. Again, one of those guys who's just down to earth and fun to hang out with. And I really believe he represents a lot of what we're passionate about in the field of research with these creatures. But, you know, whereas we like to get really excited about it, the folklore and the hype, Ken keeps us grounded. And I love what he's doing now. Michael, a lot of people may not know this yet. We also have this on tap for an interview later this year. But Lyle Blackburn and Ken Gerhart are teaming up for an American Monster Tour. They're actually doing a show about them tracking the American monsters. So I'm very excited to see that come out soon. As soon as we have some dates set for that, Lyle's already told me that they're going to be on the show with us to talk about that. So I'm excited about that.
That'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it will. Next, let's recognize Vic Cundiff of Dogman Encounters Radio. Again, folks, he's a real person. He is not a robot. And the work that he's doing in just being a friend and a listener to people who have had traumatic experiences through these encounters, really appreciate what you're doing, Vic, and want to recognize you in that area. On top of that, he's got an amazing show. If you listen to it, and listen, folks, there's a lot of people trying to copy him, but there's room for these stories in a lot of ways. But Vic is a leader in this area with Dogman Encounters, and he's doing a really great job in quality production. So thanks, Vic, for everything that you're doing. Another friend of ours, Michael, that has been with us for, going on 5 years maybe or better now, that a lot of people don't know about. She's an author. She works with us in our publishing side, but Lauren Lynn. She's a beloved young adult author. We want to recognize her as an honorary monster guy or gal, whatever you want to say, Lauren. But Lauren is one of those type of people that is constantly supporting us behind the scenes as far as the Monster Guys is concerned. And in publishing, she's right there at the top of the scene as an author and a promoter. So she is just a fantastic individual and does a lot for her community, is very much family oriented, and really represents a lot about what we're about as the Monster Guys. So thanks, Lauren.
And she's a great writer.
Man.
It's not just about telling a great story, which she does, but she also has a way of making her words and her story very rich.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like going and eating a very thick chocolate cake for some reason.
Here's another author on our list. I love this guy. I fell in love with his voice. I had another man crush on this guy for his voice. I can listen to people like Lyle and this guy all day long. Isaac Thorne. He is a horror author, but he's very humorous. And he's become a huge friend of the Monster Guys podcast, big supporter of what we do, and we try to return that favor. But like Lauren, Isaac and Lauren, they are some of the most generous people in social media, in promotion, and helping get the word out. Isaac, I just appreciate you and your vision and what you do. Really super appreciate everything you've done for the Monster Guys podcast this year. And Isaac was on our show, Welcome to the Red Table. So if you want to check him out and his work, check out episode 3, I think, session 3 of Welcome to the Red Table, and get to know Isaac a little bit better. Now, of course, the next two may come as no surprise. They've been such great friends of the Monster Guys. Ellie Haskin and Jesse Fivecoat of Encounters podcast, two of the funniest and most intelligent, possibly the silliest people that we've met along the way.
That's true.
And just have had a great time talking to them.
great academics. Again, like a few others on this list, really great folklorists. Really enjoyed making that connection with them this year.
Yeah. So congratulations, guys. I know Eleanor and Jesse both are working on, I think, their certification or something with MUFON.
Mm-hmm.
And Ellie really wants to be a part of the STAR team, but I can say I knew you win. Yeah. You were part of the Monster Guys
before she becomes
before you become a man in black. All right, so Richard Martin from Ireland, the Fear Merchant. This guy, man, what a hoot. We've had a great time with him this year. Richard, you are an honorary Monster Guy for sure. You've been on the show several times this year. You've promoted us with your show, and we've just got a great friendship with you. I can't wait to get to Ireland to hang out with you. So Richard Martin, really appreciate it. You guys check out thefearmerchant.com and some of his podcasts. Also, in that same international group, I.C. Sedgwick. We'd like to honor you. You are an amazing author. You really deepen the knowledge of folklore and some really spooky topics, paranormal and supernatural stuff. The work you've done with us this year is very much appreciated, and we just want to say thank you and honor you as a part of this community. So thanks, Icy. Also, Matthew Meyer, yokai.com, yokaiologist, yokai illustrator, expert in all things yokai and Japanese.
Great artist.
Amazing artist. And has been friends with us since we started doing talks publicly on yokai and monsters. Matthew was one of the first people that helped educate us on some specific things within the study of yokai. And when we began presenting, he allowed us to use his art to help people visualize some of these just beautiful and quirky monsters over there in the culture. And along the way, he's allowed us to use his art in our story time. He's got some books out that are just really great resources with this topic. So
yeah, I feel like the term wealth of knowledge is nowhere near enough to explain.
Yeah, I don't feel so smart when I talk to Matthew because he's just at that level. We always enjoy talking to him. He's been on the show many times. He'll be back with us again very soon in 2018. But Matthew, thank you. Really appreciate the work you're doing. Another international friend that we've been with now for a couple of years and really grown a great friendship with this year, Dee Dee Cheney of FolkloreThursday.com. Dee Dee has almost been a one-person train this year. She's been trucking all year long with Folklore Thursday, doing just an amazing job. She's published 2 of our articles this year, allowed us to do a podcast for her. In the midst of it all, she's writing a book about to be released on the topic of folklore in the UK, and just very proud to know her, very passionate about the work that she's doing through Folklore Thursday community. So Dee Dee, thank you so much for making us a part of your community. We love having you a part of ours. Congratulations.
Thank you for making that community.
Definitely.
That's a fantastic thing for the world.
A person who's been with us almost possibly since episode 1, from the very beginning, at least not long after we started, an artist and someone who has supported us so much along the way, Carissa Swinson. We want to say thank you so much for what you've done to promote the Monster Guys. And folks, check out her studio, goblinfruitstudio.com, a sculptor. If you remember back around the middle of the year, she's the one that sent us some artwork and some pens and just some stunning work that she's done. Carissa has been talking to us for a long time about topics that we bring up from time to time. She's recommended some topics and is always ready to promote and help us get the word out about what we're doing. And we just appreciate you as a listener, as a friend, and as an artist. So thank you very much. Last person on our list for this year, Michael, and it's crazy because I don't even know the person's real name. I only know their author name, their author handle in the world of folklore, and that is Nifty Buckles.
This person is probably one of our favorite people on Twitter. We love you all, everybody that we've talked about so far. But I have to say, I really enjoy when Nifty Buckles gets into a conversation with us or with anybody on Twitter, just because they find the strangest and most entertaining gifs that I could ever possibly imagine.
Yeah, is it GIFs or GIFs?
GIFs.
Yeah, is it GIFs or GIFs?
It's GIFs.
We're going to get into this conversation, aren't we? GIFs or GIFs?
It's GIFs. I don't care what the guy who coined the term says, it's GIFs.
No, you can't be like that. But yeah, so Nifty Buckles, every time there's a conversation or you throw out promotion or helping us get the word out, some amazing movable pictures online that you put out there. Yeah, very timely. But, you know, you're just a great friend, and we love having conversation with you. And, of course, your knowledge and what you bring to the topic of folklore and a lot of the topics we cover is, again, just a wealth. And we appreciate your support and everything that you do. So there you go, folks. 2017 Honorary Monster Guys and Gals, every one of you, thank you so much for all that you do. We will get in touch with you if we don't already have your address. We want to send you just a token of our appreciation, but the bigger picture in that, for each one of you on this list, we will be donating an amount to an organization who is directly involved with bullying prevention and or child literacy. So we hope it makes a little bit of a difference, and know that just your support of the Monster Guys is going to make a difference in somebody's life this year. So thank you very much. And for everybody listening, thank you for hanging out with us this year. It's just been a stellar year, and we can't wait to get back with you and hang out with you again in 2018. Thank you so much, and be safe, and have a great rest of your year and an even better 2018. Good night.
Good night.
Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate you having us on and always, giving us a chance to talk about what we're doing. It's one of my favorite podcasts.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
We appreciate that. Let's move on to number...
All this talking is making me thirsty.